over the last 6 months or so, as Star Wars fever started to build and talk of the movie became omnipresent, and more people started to play Fantasy Flight games, Star Wars role-playing game in whatever flavor appealed to them, I started being involved in more and more conversations about the game, and often those would in some way touch on the idea of narrative gaming and people expressing uncertainty or questions about running, quote, narrative games. Leaving the use of the term aside, in this video we'll just focus on narrative the way it's used in this game. I don't think that there's as much of a difference as maybe people expect. The game is explicitly divided into two poles of play, which they call narrative gameplay and structured gameplay, and you can find the most explicit reference to these in the conflict and combat chapter in each of the three games. Here's where it details the shift between narrative gameplay into structured gameplay. So you could almost think of narrative gameplay, this game's narrative gameplay, as the default. When does that shift occur? Well, that shift occurs specifically when more and more consistent detail is needed in order to resolve things fairly around the table. Now, how that's actually expressed in the game is quite simple, but reading through it might get lost in the details of new game and the vastness of the Star Wars universe and all of that. But it really boils down to, in narrative gameplay, the system, the rules, provide you with costs for things like actions. But they don't provide you with much in the way of the effects of those actions. That's on you. They don't really provide you with much in the way of time limits or frequency, how often you need to do something. They just give you guidance on how much it should cost to change a relationship between things, such as range or influencing how someone feels about you, or traveling great distances, that sort of stuff. They give you the costs, and they leave it up to your common sense, the group's consensus, the nature of the Star Wars universe and our understanding of it, that sort of thing, to guide resolving those issues, if there should be a die roll, or if we should just decide that it happens. All of these things are part of narrative gameplay. But the game does provide you with costs and guidance for when rolls need to be made and what, let's say, constitutes an appropriate roll, if there's something worth rolling for, which is expressed in an awful lot of games, which is part of my feeling that this game really isn't as different as it might strike people, despite the funky dice and their ability to return vastly more interesting results than a pass-fail system. So, on the structured side, this is when, in a situation like combat, or when time matters in a chase or escape, defusing a bomb or whatever, when moment by moment stresses matter. When injury is coming in, your character's on fire, how quickly will they be burned to death? This is all part of structured gameplay. So, in other words, this part of the game not only assigns costs to things, it assigns, in many cases, an effect or a template from which you can devise an effect. It gives you more information as the game master for resolving actions swiftly. You don't need to spend as much time thinking about it, which helps you keep the tension, the excitement going, and it helps you stay fair and consistent. How long, how many maneuvers does it take to change range relationships in this way? How many maneuvers does it take to go from no weapon to having a weapon drawn and aimed? And it should be consistent. Why does it need to be consistent? Why can't we just say, well, it makes a cool story. For the good of the story, let's just say you can do that. Well, this is a pretty big game. There are a lot of different character types. It's based in the Star Wars universe, which is vast, and it's drawing from the expanded universe, and it's drawing from all of the films, and it's filled with very, very cool things that you've seen in the movies that the game system has been, built around emulating at the table. If we're just allowing anybody to do anything because it makes a good story, we've pretty much decided to ignore the system, and we've also started to ignore player choices, which kind of goes against the idea of working in collaboration. And that may sound counterintuitive, but let's explain my point of view. Let's say it would be really, really cool in this particular scene if a character with a holstered weapon would like to be able to draw it really quickly and startle or surprise the enemy. I totally agree. That would be cool if you could suddenly have it out. But probably somewhere around the table is someone who has worked toward being able to do that, who has spent experience on talents that enable them to do that. If we just say, it's okay, you can do it because it would be cool, we're also saying that all of those experience points that were spent and all that time spent working toward that ability were wasted because it's something that anybody can do if they want to. In games with players that are perhaps less experienced in separating their emotions from quantifying the resolution of a role, like new gamers or gamers who are competitive with each other, being able to track how relationships change based on spending maneuvers or how many actions you can take or that sort of thing, that actually becomes important. Tempers can flare if one character is being allowed to move too far, act too often, have too great an effect, and whatnot, particularly when long-lived and beloved characters are involved. People can forget that they're adults, or they can forget that they're friends, and they can become angered by these things, which, is neither here nor there really for the purpose of this video, but it's one of the things which actually happens in actual play and can be prevented by understanding how your game system works and applying it fairly. As long as everybody knows how the game works and recognizes that it has been applied fairly, then if they're still getting bent out of shape, then that's a signal of a whole other problem that you can deal with in a whole other way. But a game that includes narrative gameplay, well, this isn't just carte blanche to say, whatever I want to happen should happen. It's the freedom from, let's say, charts. It's the freedom from scripted effects. It's the ability to use common sense in the game with confidence without feeling like, maybe I should check if there's a rule somewhere. That kind of thing. So that you can just go with the flow. You can get into how the game works. When you reach that moment of structured play, this is where the game system rises up to support you. It's not getting in your way, as I've heard and felt that some people feel. It really isn't. Nothing has changed between the moment of narrative gameplay and structured gameplay in terms of when you invoke the system. You're now invoking the system just much more often, which is a load on your organic processor up there, but it's also a time when you need to be much more consistent, much more fair, and people need to be able to base their decisions on, let's say, the rules of our shared reality. They need to know how far they can move. They need to know what they can accomplish. They need to know what risk they are facing if they jump through the fire or, span the chasm, that sort of thing. And when they get caught up in the moment and they're acting with this knowledge, and suddenly, for narrative reasons, that knowledge becomes untrue, for their good or for their ill, you've done your game a disservice. You've done them a disservice. You've upset the apple cart of their shared reality, if you will. Now, when a game is new, it's difficult to know what everything means. In a game like this, you have things like, what is a success? What is the value of one advantage? What is the advantage of or the effect of one threat, a despair or triumph, that sort of thing. There's a learning period. There's a moment or a period of time in your gameplay where consistency will be likely true throughout the session, but over a series of sessions, you'll be finding your way with those things. And that's great. That's cool. As long as there is, in my opinion, an effort toward establishing for your group what that baseline is so that people can narrate their own effects when it's their turn. When someone gets 3 advantages on a roll and they want to be able to narrate what that actually means within the fiction of the scene that's going on, it's awfully hard to do that if you're wondering, am I going too far for the value of my 3 advantages? Or why is it that player's 1 advantage seems to be like getting a triumph, but when I'm trying to narrate my 2 advantages, I'm stuck with this puny little effect? Learning the game, looking back over the past session and talking with the players about how it's flowing and how things might be out of sync with the expectations of the designers, that's useful. That's helpful. That improves both the narrative side of the gameplay and the structured side of the gameplay. Switching between the two really shouldn't feel like anything is happening at all. Structured gameplay and narrative gameplay are 2 sides of the same coin. The coin is the game master and the group adjudicating effects. The fact that it's a more narrative, more often game means that more people around the table are involved in resolving those effects. They get to contribute to what things look like, or what they actually did to accomplish that advantage, or what kind of reaction they're having that represents all of that strain or threat. That's great. In order for a group of people to agree on and do a thing well, in order for teamwork to flow well, there needs to be an establishment, a base establishment of expectations. And that's what getting in tune with the structured gameplay side of the game allows. As you go through the series, we start out with Edge of the Empire, which introduces a lot of concepts. This continues in Age of Rebellion and continues more in Force and Destiny. And a lot of people seem to be saying that the games are getting more complicated. The rules are becoming more intrusive. They're projecting themselves into my narrative. They're binding my hands and this sort of thing. And I'm sorry, I cannot agree with this. The rules themselves aren't changing, but the types of characters you're being exposed to is expanding. And as you go through each career and its specialization, you're seeing that each career and its specialization has access to more and different talents. And there are a lot of careers now and a lot of specializations. And it's very, very difficult and it's unrealistic to expect any game master or group to be totally fluent in every talent and know instantly when they come up how to resolve them. But the way that those talents interact with the system hasn't changed from the beginning. There's a lot of talk about the talent reflect and parry and how they might be broken, but they really aren't any different than dodge, which was in Edge of the Empire, and we don't hear a lot of complaints about it. Everything works exactly the same way that it always has. But here's the thing. A lot of it is unfamiliar. The Star Wars universe, as I said earlier, is huge. It's very unlikely that you're going to have a lot of exposure to every single talent in the game, and some will come up that you're not really ready to decide on. You could take a moment, check the book, or you could decide, well, let's just wing it this time. And then winging it might become the reality, and that's fine. That's certainly the right of any group. But checking with the book allows you to make that decision more consistently, allows people to travel between different game groups with greater confidence, allows people to jump from hangout to hangout and expect the game to work, to expect to be able to contribute to the game with as much confidence and creativity as they should be able to in order to have a good time. So this is 15 minutes of discussion about narrative in Fantasy Flight games, Star Wars role-playing. If it's unclear, and I suspect that parts of it may not be, please engage me in the comments. Let's talk about this stuff and find our way together.